Story 1. The room with the mirror too low. She always booked the same suite. Same time. Same scent in the air, clean linen and a hint of something citrus that never quite belonged to the hotel. By now, I knew every lamp switch, every creak in the floor. But that mirror on the far wall, it hung a little too low, like it wanted to catch something below eye level. I told myself it was design. Still, I'd catch my own reflection blinking a heartbeat late. Tonight, she stood by the window, phone in hand, city lights sliding over her skin. When I stepped closer, our shoulders almost touched. Her perfume was recent, still alive, not yet blended into the room. The light from the chandelier traced the shape of her mouth, and I forgot the small script we usually started with. She smiled at the mirror instead of me. "You're late," she said, but her reflection mouthed it slower. I moved behind her, pretending to fix the collar of her blouse. My fingers brushed the fabric, warm, a little damp from the air. Just enough contact to feel intentional, but not enough to be called a touch. She didn't move. The reflection showed her pulse at the base of her throat, steady and visible. Yet standing this close, I couldn't feel it. She spoke softly, close enough that the last word grazed my ear. "Face the mirror," she said. Her breath lingered there, warm, timed too slow for normal speech. In the glass, she waited behind me, but a second later her mouth formed the same command again. The delay was small, a fraction of a second. Still, it felt like the mirror was learning her voice. We sat at the small table by the minibar, our drinks untouched. She watched the mirror as if expecting a signal. I tried to follow her gaze, but every time I blinked, the reflection lagged, my hand still in motion when it should have been still. I laughed it off, said maybe the glass was warped. She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the version of me that hadn't caught up yet. Under the table, her knee brushed mine, light, deliberate. She didn't pull away. The air between us thickened, humming with the kind of silence that waits to be broken. I wanted to speak, to name what was happening, but her reflection already had its mouth open, a breath too soon. The lag was closing, syncing with her heartbeat instead of time. A loose strand of hair slid across her cheek. I reached out before thinking, brushing it back behind her ear. My fingers paused at the edge of her neck, barely there, just enough to feel her skin react. A shiver ran through her that didn't reach the reflection. In the glass, she stayed perfectly still, eyes fixed on mine as if she'd been waiting for that moment. Silence settled, thick and warm. The city outside moved, but the room refused to follow. I could hear both of us breathing, out of sync, one sound a beat too late. The mirror caught that rhythm, almost echoing it. When I finally looked away, the reflection didn't. It kept watching, like a third presence in the suite had forgotten whose body it belonged to. She asked me to turn off one lamp, then another, until only the glow from the bathroom door painted the mirror gold. Her tone stayed calm, professional, rehearsed, but her hands trembled slightly when they passed the switch. In the dimness, I could see two of everything. Two faces, two shadows, two pulses out of sync. The mirror version of her leaned forward first, a breath before the real one did. When she finally stood, I felt the warmth she left behind, an imprint through my shirt, lingering like static. On the glass, a smudge glowed faintly under the low light, shaped like her fingertips. But the spacing was wrong, too high for her reach, too wide for her hand. I rubbed it away and caught a faint scent rising, clean linen mixed with that same citrus, only sharper now, like it had turned into heat. She stepped close again, close enough that her breath touched the edge of my jaw. "Don't look away," she whispered, and her reflection moved first. Then came the sound, a soft exhale right beside my ear, even though she hadn't spoken again. I turned toward her voice, but she was already by the door, silent, eyes wide with something that looked like apology. Behind her, the mirror still showed her leaning toward me. Have you ever watched your own face lie to you? When I checked out the next morning, the front desk said the suite was already reserved. For the same time next Friday, same guest name. They handed me the confirmation text before I could protest. It came from her number. I told myself not to answer, not to go back. But tonight, the faint smell of citrus clings to my collar, and the mirror in my apartment seems to breathe, just a second late. Story 2. Check out at 4 a.m. They said she was paid to stay the night. But I think I paid her to keep her eyes open. The clock said 3:58 a.m. when she arrived, heels soft on the carpet, no echo, no rush. I'd asked for silence, not company, but the agency sent her anyway. The room smelled of salt and new linen. She didn't introduce herself. Just looked at the bed, then at me like she already knew which of us would sleep first. She sat near the edge, shoulders almost brushing mine. The perfume was fresh, clean, the kind that fades slower than it should. The light from the window drew the outline of her mouth against the pale sheet, too steady for someone breathing. The second hand on the bedside clock ticked once, then hesitated. I reached to straighten her collar, an awkward, automatic gesture. My fingers brushed the warm fabric near her neck, just enough to feel that she wasn't cold. She didn't flinch. The clock behind us clicked twice, slow, like it was waiting to see what I'd do next. She spoke close to my ear, the words landing somewhere between a whisper and a sigh. "You don't have to talk," she said, her breath tracing the edge of my jaw. Each syllable matched the ticking behind her. Perfect timing, too perfect. I kept my eyes on the red digits. 3:59 a.m. The minute refused to change. For a while, neither of us moved. The sea outside pressed against the glass, whispering like fabric dragged over wood. I told myself I'd close my eyes when the clock reached 4. It was easier to count seconds than to admit how quiet her breathing had become. Under the table, her knee touched mine, light, deliberate. She didn't pull back. The contact was small, but the air thickened around it, dense with perfume and the slow heat of two people pretending not to notice. The ticking faltered again, a stutter in the dark. A strand of her hair slipped across her cheek. I reached to move it aside, barely touching her skin. It was warmer than it should have been, like she'd been standing under light too long. The moment stretched, silent, until I realized the clock wasn't ticking anymore. We stayed still. The room listened to our breathing and seemed to weigh it. Every sound had shape, the rustle of sheets, the soft drag of air between teeth. I thought I saw her chest rise, then fall, but the movement didn't match mine. The digits still said 3:59 a.m. I tried to speak, ask if she was okay, but the question never left my throat. Her eyes were open, fixed somewhere beyond me, reflecting the red glow of the clock. The silence between ticks felt alive, like something waiting for permission to start again. When she finally stood, I felt the loss before I saw it. A trace of warmth lingered where her hand had rested on my arm, faint and electric. The perfume followed her movement, soft but wrong, too human to be air, too heavy to vanish. On the nightstand, the second hand hung motionless between breaths. She leaned close before leaving. Her lips stopped just beside my ear, not touching. "Don't blink," she whispered, then smiled at the clock instead of me. The echo of her voice came from behind, soft and delayed, as if someone else had repeated it from the doorway. I followed her into the hall, but she was already gone. The clock outside the room glowed the same red numbers, 4 o'clock a.m. My pulse kept time for it. Back inside, the bed was untouched. Only the scent of her perfume folded into the sheets, refusing to fade. Would you stay if someone promised not to blink until dawn? Story 3. The penthouse request. He said the only rule was silence. But the recorder on his table didn't stop when I did. 10 p.m. The city hummed below like static trapped in glass. I stood in front of the penthouse door, trying to smooth the crease in my shirt. The client had written only one rule: no words during dinner. No greeting, no questions, no sound except what he allowed. When the door opened, the silence felt arranged, like furniture. He was taller than I expected. Precise eyes. Not a smile, not quite a stare, something in between. The table behind him was already set for 2, but only one plate held food. He gestured for me to sit. The audio recorder on the table blinked once. Red light, heartbeat pace. I tried not to breathe too loud. When he leaned forward to pour the wine, our shoulders almost touched. The scent of his cologne was clean, fresh, deliberate. It outlined the curve of his mouth when the light passed. For a moment, I forgot which one of us was supposed to stay silent. When I reached for the napkin, my sleeve brushed his cufflink. He stopped me with a small tilt of his head, then reached across the table, slow, careful, and straightened my collar. His fingers grazed the fabric, warm enough to leave a trace. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't quite permission either. The recorder blinked faster, capturing that pause between us like it was part of the meal. He finally spoke, close enough that his words didn't travel far. "Don't move." The air carried the sentence straight into my ear, soft and measured. His breath had the weight of heat against skin, steady, controlled, almost rehearsed. I heard my pulse answer it, shallow and loud. He leaned back, expression unreadable, as if testing how much silence I could hold. He began eating without a sound. Each bite, each placement of the fork, perfectly timed with the recorder's blink. I realized it only flashed when I moved, when my breath shifted, when fabric slid against the chair. He was collecting me in fragments, breaths, tremors, hesitation. I tried to slow down, to erase myself from the tape. But the red light pulsed anyway, like it could hear my thoughts. I felt something under the table, his knee against mine. A gentle press, deliberate enough to know it wasn't a mistake. He didn't look up. The contact stayed there, still, warm, insistent. I froze, then matched the stillness he demanded. The recorder clicked once, a small approval. He adjusted his tie without breaking the rhythm, and I could swear the air between us grew heavier, scented with his cologne and quiet control. When he finally looked at me, it was through the reflection in the wineglass. The city lights moved across his eyes like water. I felt the urge to speak, to ask what exactly he was recording, but he lifted a hand first. Reaching forward, he brushed a loose strand of hair from my face. His fingertip barely touched skin, enough to draw a quiet shiver I hoped he wouldn't notice. The recorder caught it anyway, a pulse of sound too human to edit out. We stayed that way for a while, the air vibrating with unsaid things. The hum of the city was distant now, filtered through glass and altitude. Every breath felt borrowed. He leaned back, watching me instead of the food, as though waiting for a noise I hadn't made yet. The silence grew thick, almost aware, and for a second I thought I heard another rhythm behind us. Something softer, slower, breathing when we didn't. He pressed a button on the recorder. The sound that came out wasn't our conversation. There hadn't been any. It was only me. My breathing. My pulse. The slight scrape of fabric when I moved. Each sound looped back through the room, familiar but detached, as if someone else were wearing my voice. He watched my reaction, his fingers resting lightly on the table's edge, almost smiling when the playback trembled at the sound of my heartbeat. He stood then, crossing behind me. The air shifted. The faint warmth of his presence trailed the back of my neck. When he stopped, I could feel the space he left, like an outline drawn in heat. I turned just enough to see his reflection in the window, close but not touching. When he finally stepped away, a trace of his scent clung to my sleeve. It shouldn't have stayed that long. The recorder clicked again, new file. Final take. He moved close enough that I could see the reflection of the red light trembling on his cuff. "Stay still," he whispered, his breath grazing the edge of my ear. But the sound that followed wasn't his. It came from behind me, repeating the same words with a slower rhythm, softer, almost kind. My body forgot how to breathe. "Would you have turned around?" When I opened my eyes, the chair across from me was empty. The plate untouched. The recorder still blinking, steady and patient, collecting nothing but the echo of my own breath. I left the penthouse before sunrise, yet for days afterward that scent followed me, clean, deliberate, waiting. The police said the room was clear when they arrived, but they kept the recorder running. It hasn't stopped. Story 4. Low Tide Client. Midnight. A deserted coastline. The sea kept breathing through the walls, until it stopped. The house was too close to the water. At low tide, the waves whispered below the deck, soft, measured like someone pacing. He said that was why he'd rented it. "I want to hear the sea breathe," he told me, half smiling, half testing if I'd laugh. I didn't. I needed the money, and his voice carried that calm kind of loneliness that makes you agree to almost anything. We sat by the wide glass door, the tide reflecting on our faces like a slow pulse. His shoulder almost brushed mine, the scent of salt mixed with something faintly sweet, recently sprayed. The light from the lamp drew the shape of his mouth in amber. I told myself it was just proximity, but the latch on the door trembled again though the air was still. He leaned forward to refill my glass, and I adjusted the collar of his shirt without thinking. My fingers grazed the fabric, warm, pressed, faintly damp from the ocean air. It wasn't enough to be called a touch, yet the silence thickened as if it were. The latch clicked again, soft as breath, matching the rhythm of the waves outside. He spoke too close this time. The words barely formed before they reached my ear, slow, deliberate, carrying the warmth of someone who knows you'll listen anyway. "You hear it too, don't you?" he whispered. His breath lingered longer than the question. I nodded, unsure whether he meant the sea, or something moving between the walls. The sound of the tide deepened. Each crash rolled beneath the floorboards, making the glasses tremble just slightly. He kept talking about frequencies, the way water remembers shape, how walls can echo what they've absorbed. I smiled, pretending to understand. My pulse matched the sea's rhythm, though the ocean was still 100 feet away. Under the table, our knees found each other. The contact was too gentle to seem planned, but neither of us pulled back. His gaze didn't move, it stayed fixed on the door latch, vibrating with each unseen wave. "It's getting closer," he said, and I couldn't tell if he meant the tide or me. A strand of hair slipped across his face when the lamp flickered. I reached out to move it aside. My fingers barely touched his skin, yet it felt charged, static, and warmth mixed in the salt-heavy air. For a second he closed his eyes. The latch rattled once more, sharper this time, as if reacting to the pause between us. We went quiet. The kind of silence that listens back. The surf outside kept its slow breathing, syncing with ours. The air had weight now, a humidity that pressed against the skin and made every inhale feel intimate. I thought I heard a low murmur behind the wall, too soft to be words, too human to be wind. He asked me to stay a little longer. Said the tide would reach its quietest point soon, that moment before it turns back. I agreed, though I couldn't explain why my chest felt tight. The lamp dimmed to a pulse. I could see the latch trembling with each unseen wave, small, mechanical breaths that didn't match the ocean anymore. When he finally stood, his hand brushed mine. The touch left a patch of warmth that clung even after he stepped away. On my wrist lingered the scent of his cologne, salt, citrus, something else I couldn't name. The floor near the door gleamed darker, wet in a thin line leading inward. I told myself it was condensation, but the pattern curved like a footprint. He came close again, close enough that I felt his breath at my ear. He whispered something I didn't catch, a name maybe, but the echo came from behind me where no one stood. The latch slid open by itself, slow, patient. The sea had gone silent. The only sound was our breathing, his against my neck, mine against the dark. "Would you have closed the door for me?" When the morning came, the tide had pulled back to nothing. The house smelled of salt and metal. His shoes were still by the door, warm to the touch, though the air was cold. I wiped the damp floor once, twice, but the mark kept returning, shaped like a step waiting to be followed. Story 5. The Rooftop Rule. They said she only meets on rooftops. No lights. No names. No shoes. I thought that was just part of the thrill, until the blanket moved on its own. It was 1 a.m. when the elevator stopped at the last floor, the kind that ends in silence instead of a hallway. The rooftop door was already open. Warm air slipped through the gap like someone breathing out slowly. The city hummed below, soft, distant, unaware. My job was simple. Stay an hour, no questions, no lights, no shoes. But the way she'd written barefoot only in the message, it felt less like a rule and more like a ritual. She was already there, sitting near the ledge, shoulders almost touching mine as I stepped into the dim light that leaked from the stairwell. Her perfume was clean, recent, the kind that fades just before you can name it. The air moved between us in quiet ripples. I could see how the light drew the outline of her mouth, steady, unbothered. My heartbeat timed itself to that curve. She noticed me adjusting my collar. Maybe it was the heat, maybe nerves. Either way, she reached out, just enough to straighten the edge of my sleeve. Her fingers grazed the fabric, warm against my skin, the kind of touch that pretends to be accidental but lingers half a second too long. I told myself it was part of the job, but my pulse didn't listen. The sound of it filled the empty space between our breaths. When she spoke, her voice carried no effort. Each word was shaped for proximity, not distance. She leaned closer, so close the end of her sentence landed inside my ear, soft and slow. The warmth of her breath stayed longer than the words themselves. "Don't turn on the light," she said. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. The city wind answered for us, pulling a corner of the blanket toward the edge. For a while, neither of us said anything. I tried to count the city lights below, but they blurred, bending with the wind. Somewhere far off, a siren rose and fell, too distant to belong to this rooftop. She shifted closer again, the sound of fabric dragging softly against concrete. "You're wondering why the shoes," she said. I almost laughed, but her tone, half whisper, half warning, made me stop. "Bare feet tell the truth," she added. "They know when to run." The edge of the blanket brushed my knee as she moved. Then her leg found mine under it, light contact, deliberate by how long it stayed. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. The city noise dipped, like the air itself was waiting for permission to move again. I caught the faintest tremor in her breath, or maybe it was mine. Something about the warmth between us felt rehearsed, or remembered. A loose strand of her hair drifted across her face. I don't know what made me do it, habit, impulse, but I reached to move it away. My fingertips barely touched her temple. The skin there shivered, or maybe it was the wind pretending to. She turned slightly, enough that my hand hovered near her jaw. The moment balanced on nothing, fragile as glass. Then she exhaled, and I felt it against my wrist, warm, precise, intentional. Silence followed, not empty but full. The kind that hums against the ribs. We both stayed still, listening to the rooftop breathe with us. Somewhere, a flag rope hit metal again and again, too steady to be random. The sound counted our pauses. The air thickened, carrying her perfume and the trace of something older. Dust, stone, faint electricity. I didn't dare speak. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. She rose without warning, bare feet silent on the concrete. "Stay," she murmured, and crossed to the far side of the roof. I heard the faint scuff of skin against stone, the shift of weight on gravel. Then she turned back, pointing to the folded blanket between us. "Put it where I was sitting," she said. Her tone left no room for questions. I obeyed, laying it down in the exact spot she'd left. A patch of warmth still trapped in the fabric, unmistakably human. When she stepped away, I caught the heat her body had left behind. It clung to my palms even after I moved. A smell rose from the blanket, perfume, faint sweat, night air, and for an instant I thought I heard her voice inside it. I turned, expecting her shadow, but only the city glowed back. The blanket sagged again under invisible weight, as if someone had just sat down. My throat tightened. The warmth didn't fade. I froze, every muscle caught between leaving and staying. Then I felt it again, the shift of air beside my ear, a whisper brushing the skin. Her voice, unmistakable, too close to be possible. "You followed the rule," she said. I turned toward the sound, but the rooftop was empty. The blanket still pressed down as though someone breathed on it. My pulse counted seconds in my neck. "If you lie there," the voice added, You'll feel me watching. And then it stopped. Only the wind remained. I didn't move until dawn thinned the city into outlines. When I finally stepped away, the blanket still held its shape, still warm where she'd been, or where something else had stayed. I told myself it was just the concrete holding heat. But as I reached the door, the warmth touched my ankle, slow and deliberate, like a hand that didn't want to let go. If someone left their warmth behind, would you dare lie in it?